Hello, my dark family. This is your host, Mr. Dark, back with another chilling tale that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about the unseen world. Tonight, I bring you the haunting story of Claire, a college student whose curiosity led her to a cursed lagoon and into the grip of a malevolent spirit. What began as a simple field trip turned into a battle for her very soul. But was it just a haunting? Or did Claire's own choices invite something far more sinister into her life? Stay tuned as I unravel the mystery of the drowned spirit, a tale of terror, resilience, and the consequences of stepping too close to the unknown. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's dive into the darkness together, if you dare. Claire, a free-spirited freshman at Denver University, was eager for the upcoming field trip to Lake Hollow. The trip promised a reprieve from the stress of finals, with its itinerary boasting hikes through pine forests and visits to hidden natural wonders. Claire had always been captivated by water bodies, particularly those shrouded in mystique. So, when the group arrived at their second-day stop, a remote lodge near a secluded lagoon, her curiosity was piqued. The lagoon itself was stunning yet unsettling. Encircled by dense trees and rocky outcrops, it glimmered green under the fading daylight. Its surface was still, save for the occasional ripple that seemed to beckon anyone nearby. "Look at this place," Claire said to her best friend, Rachel, as they walked closer to the water's edge. "Claire, this is disgusting." Rachel wrinkled her nose at the moss-covered rocks. "Stay back. You have no idea what could be in there." But Claire couldn't resist. She crouched by the bank, trailing her fingers in the cool water. The chill of the liquid sent a shiver up her spine, but the touch was oddly calming. She felt as if the water itself wanted her to stay. Then a sound broke the stillness. "Claire." The voice was soft and melodic, almost as if it belonged to the wind. Claire froze, her heart racing. She scanned the lagoon but saw nothing unusual. "You heard that, right?" she asked Rachel. Rachel frowned. "Heard what?" "The breeze. Come on, we need to head back." The group returned to the lodge for dinner, but Claire couldn't shake the strange sensation that had lingered at the lagoon. Her shoulders felt heavy, as if weighed down by an invisible burden. "You okay?" Rachel asked, noticing Claire's hunched posture. "Yeah, just tired, I guess," Claire replied, though she didn't believe her own words. Later that night, Claire dreamt of the lagoon. In her vision, the surface of the water churned violently before a figure emerged. It was humanoid but grotesque, with pale, rotting skin and hollow eyes. "Join me," it hissed. Claire woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. Returning to Denver University after the trip to Lake Hollow should have brought Claire some sense of normalcy. However, the eerie events that began at the lagoon had only just started to reveal their terrifying depths. Claire's dorm room, usually a sanctuary where she and Rachel gossiped, studied, and laughed late into the night, now felt cold and uninviting. It started subtly. On her first night back, Claire felt uneasy, as if someone were watching her from the corners of the room. Rachel noticed her discomfort. "Still freaked out by the lagoon?" Rachel teased, unpacking her duffel bag. Claire forced a laugh. "Yeah, I guess it just gave me the creeps." That night, Claire struggled to fall asleep. She tossed and turned, her thoughts replaying the strange sensation she felt by the water. Around 3 a.m., she was finally drifting off when she heard it again. "Claire!" Her eyes snapped open. The whisper was faint but unmistakable. It came from the direction of the closet. Claire sat up, staring at the door. It was slightly ajar, shadows spilling out onto the carpet. "Rachel?" she whispered, looking over to her friend's bed. Rachel was sound asleep, her breathing steady. Claire hesitated but forced herself to get up. She padded quietly to the closet and peeked inside. Her clothes hung in orderly rows, and the small space was empty. Yet The moment she closed the door, the whisper returned, louder this time. "Claire?" She stumbled back, her heart pounding. Over the next week, Claire began noticing other strange phenomena. She felt cold drafts on her neck, despite all the windows being closed. Books fell from her desk without explanation. Most unsettling of all, she often woke up to the sensation of someone touching her. One night, she bolted upright after feeling fingers graze her arm. She turned the lights on, trembling, but the room was empty. Rachel, exhausted from studying, barely stirred. "You look awful," Rachel said the next morning, noting the dark circles under Claire's eyes. "Are you even sleeping?" "Not really," Claire admitted, her voice shaky. "Something weird is happening. I keep hearing voices and I swear something touched me last night." Rachel frowned. "Maybe you're just stressed. Finals are around the corner." But Claire knew it wasn't just stress. The next few nights escalated Claire's fears. She began seeing fleeting shadows in her peripheral vision. At first, they were small, darting across the room like a flicker of light. Then, one night, she saw a taller shadow, a distinctly human silhouette, standing by her window. "Rachel!" she cried out, fumbling for the lamp. Rachel groaned, sitting up. "What's wrong now?" Claire pointed to the window, but the shadow was gone. "There was someone standing there. I swear it." Rachel walked over and peered outside. The dormitory was on the second floor, and the only thing visible was the parking lot below. "No one's here, Claire. You're seriously freaking me out." Claire hugged her knees to her chest, her body shaking. "I'm not imagining this, Rachel. Something followed me back from that lagoon." Rachel hesitated but didn't argue further. The situation reached its peak a few nights later. Claire had been reading in bed, trying to distract herself, when her desk lamp began to flicker. She glanced at it, muttering, "Not now," and leaned over to tap the switch. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. Her heart raced as she fumbled for her phone's flashlight. Just as she turned it on, a loud crash echoed from the closet. "Rachel!" Claire screamed. Rachel bolted upright, fumbling for the light switch. The overhead bulb flickered back to life, illuminating the room. Both girls stared in horror at the closet door, which now hung wide open. Claire's clothes lay scattered across the floor, as if they'd been ripped from their hangers. Rachel's face paled. "Okay, I believe you now," she whispered. Claire's breaths came in shallow gasps. "It's real," she said, her voice trembling. "Whatever was at that lagoon, it's here." Rachel suggested they call Claire's parents, who lived an hour away in Denver. Claire initially resisted, not wanting to worry them, but Rachel insisted. That weekend, Claire's father arrived at the dorm. "You don't look well, honey," he said, concerned by her pale complexion. "Come home for a while." Claire agreed, desperate for an escape. But deep down, she knew that whatever had attached itself to her wouldn't be left behind so easily. Claire's parents brought her back to their suburban home in Denver, hoping the familiar environment would help her recover. For a while, it seemed to work. Claire spent her days curled up in her childhood room, her mother fussing over her meals, and her father checking in with concerned glances. But the relief was temporary. The first night back, Claire woke up drenched in sweat. Her room felt stifling, the air thick and oppressive. And then it began again. "Claire!" The whisper came from the corner of the room where her childhood dresser sat. Her heart pounded as she reached for her bedside lamp. Its warm glow illuminated the space, showing nothing but her belongings. Her rational mind fought to dismiss it as a nightmare, but deep down, she knew better. She wasn't alone in the house. A few days later, Claire's mother noticed the bruises. "Claire, honey, what's this on your arm?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Claire glanced down at her forearm and froze. 4 faint purplish marks like the imprint of fingers marred her pale skin. I don't know," she stammered. Her mother frowned. "Are you sleeping okay? You're so pale, and these bruises—" "I'm fine," Claire lied, pulling her sleeve down to cover the marks. But the bruises kept appearing. By the end of the week, they lined her arms and shoulders, as though invisible hands had grabbed her in the night. Her father grew increasingly alarmed and insisted on taking her to a doctor. The doctor ran a series of tests, attributing the bruises to a possible vitamin deficiency, but Claire knew better. She felt the hands on her in the night, the icy grip that lingered even after she woke. Her parents were beginning to notice the depth of her fear. Claire's father, Jim, confronted her one evening. "Claire," he said gently, "you've been jumpy ever since you came home. If something's going on, you need to tell us." Tears welled in her eyes. "Dad, you wouldn't believe me." Jim placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Try me." And so, Claire told them everything. The lagoon, the whispers, the shadow, and the attacks. Her parents exchanged uneasy glances, but didn't dismiss her. A week later, Claire's father contacted an old friend, Father Lewis, a Catholic priest who had spent years studying paranormal phenomena. Father Lewis visited their home on a Sunday afternoon, his presence calm yet commanding. "You must be Claire," he said, shaking her hand. Claire managed a weak smile. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she admitted. Father Lewis listened intently as she recounted her experiences. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "What you're describing is consistent with a drowned spirit," he said finally. Claire blinked. "A what?" "A spirit of someone who died violently in water, often by their own hand. They're trapped between realms and prey on the living to ease their suffering." Claire's mother gasped. "But why Claire? Why would it choose her?" Father Lewis looked at Claire. "Something you did, perhaps unwittingly, connected you to it. Did you speak to it? Acknowledge it?" Claire's mind raced back to the lagoon, the whisper of her name, her turning to look, her lingering by the water. I think I did," she whispered. "That was the invitation it needed," Father Lewis said gravely. Father Lewis explained that the spirit likely wanted to drag Claire into its watery domain, a fate worse than death. They're desperate to tether a living soul to their world. It's the only way they can temporarily escape their torment. "How do we stop it?" Claire's father asked. Father Lewis sighed. "It won't be easy. These spirits are relentless, but there are rituals that can sever its connection to Claire. We'll need holy water, prayers, and a symbol of protection, like a blessed medallion." He handed Claire a small silver medallion engraved with the image of Saint Michael, the protector. "Wear this at all times," he instructed. "And under no circumstances should you return to the lagoon. The spirit's power is strongest there." That evening, Father Lewis performed a protection ritual in Claire's room. He sprinkled holy water around the bed, reciting prayers in Latin. Claire felt a strange sense of calm as he worked, as though a barrier was forming between her and the entity. But the calm didn't last. At midnight, as Claire lay in bed, the room grew icy cold. Her breath misted in the air, and she clutched the medallion tightly. "Claire!" The voice was no longer a whisper. It was loud, guttural, and angry. Shadows rippled across the walls, converging in a corner of the room. Claire screamed, waking her parents. They burst into the room, only to find Claire sobbing on the floor, the medallion still clutched in her hand. "It's not gone," Claire whispered. "It's angry." Father Lewis returned the next day, alarmed by Claire's worsening condition. He admitted that the protection ritual might not be enough. "This spirit is unusually strong," he said. "It must have been bound to the lagoon for decades, growing more powerful over time." Claire's parents begged him to try another exorcism, but he hesitated. An exorcism would force a direct confrontation. If the spirit resists, Claire could be harmed, or worse. But if we don't do it, Jim argued, she might not survive this. Father Lewis nodded grimly. Then we'll need to prepare for the worst. Father Lewis returned to Claire's home later that evening, accompanied by a younger priest, Father Mark, who had assisted in similar rituals before. Together, they brought an assortment of holy items: candles, vials of holy water, incense, and a thick leather-bound Bible. "This will be dangerous," Father Lewis warned as the family gathered in the living room. His tone was solemn, his hands steady as he arranged the tools on a small wooden table. "The spirit will resist. It may lash out violently." Jim squeezed Claire's hand, his face set with determination. "We'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe." Father Lewis handed Claire a small crucifix. "Keep this with you at all times tonight. No matter what happens, hold on to your faith. The spirit feeds on fear and doubt." The exorcism began just after sundown. Father Lewis and Father Mark stood at the foot of Claire's bed, chanting prayers in Latin. Thick plumes of incense filled the room, their sweet, smoky scent clinging to the walls. Claire sat cross-legged on the bed, clutching the crucifix in one hand and the medallion around her neck in the other. Her parents stood just outside the door, watching with bated breath. At first, the room was quiet, save for the steady cadence of the priests' voices. But then a sharp, bone-chilling wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles in an instant. The temperature dropped rapidly, and Claire's breath came out in frosty puffs. She could feel it, the presence. It was here. A low growl filled the air, vibrating through the floorboards. Father Lewis tightened his grip on the Bible, his voice rising over the noise. "In the name of God, I command you to reveal yourself." The growling grew louder, more guttural. Shadows swirled along the walls, twisting and shifting until they coalesced into a single form, a tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes and waterlogged skin. Its mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, revealing jagged yellow teeth. Claire froze, her body trembling. The spirit raised an arm, pointing directly at her. "She belongs to me," it hissed. Its voice was like nails scraping across metal, cold and sharp. "She belongs to God," Father Lewis bellowed, stepping forward and splashing holy water in its direction. The spirit recoiled, emitting an ear-splitting shriek. Claire clapped her hands over her ears, the crucifix slipping from her fingers. The entity lashed out, knocking furniture across the room with invisible force. The bedside table flew into the wall, shattering into pieces. The windows rattled violently, the glass threatening to break. Father Mark stepped forward, holding a large wooden cross aloft. "You have no power here. Return to where you came from." The spirit laughed, its hollow eyes glowing with malice. "You think your prayers can save her? She invited me. She is mine." Claire's body stiffened as an invisible force pinned her to the bed. Her arms and legs thrashed as though controlled by something else. "Help me!" she screamed, her voice raw with terror. Father Lewis rushed to her side, pressing the crucifix against her forehead. The metal burned hot against her skin, but the entity's hold faltered. The spirit roared in frustration, the shadows around it swirling faster. The priests doubled down on their prayers, their voices merging into a powerful chant. Claire felt the pressure on her chest ease slightly, and she managed to grip the crucifix once more. She held it tightly, her knuckles white. "You cannot have me!" she shouted, her voice cracking but defiant. The spirit faltered, its grin wavering. But then it turned its gaze toward Jim and Claire's mother, who stood paralyzed in the doorway. "Perhaps I'll take them instead," it sneered. "No!" Claire screamed, sitting upright despite the force pushing her down. Father Lewis stepped between the spirit and the family. You will harm no one. By the power of the Holy Spirit, I command you to leave." The room erupted into chaos. Objects flew across the room, the walls shook, and the air grew so cold it burned Claire's skin. But the priests didn't stop. They continued their prayers, unwavering in their faith. Finally, with one last ear-piercing shriek, the spirit dissolved into a cloud of dark mist. The temperature in the room rose abruptly, and the shadows on the walls disappeared. Father Lewis collapsed into a chair, breathing heavily. "It's gone, for now," he said. Claire sobbed into her hands, her body shaking uncontrollably. Jim rushed to her side, wrapping his arms around her. Father Lewis looked grim. This was only a temporary victory. The spirit has retreated, but it isn't defeated. It will grow stronger if we don't act soon. "What do we do?" Claire's mother asked, her voice trembling. "We have to return to the lagoon," Father Lewis replied. "It's the source of its power. Only there can we end this once and for all." That night, Claire slept with the medallion tightly around her neck and the crucifix under her pillow. Her body ached, bruises lining her arms and chest from the spirit's assault. In the morning, she found a single wet handprint on the wall near her bed. Her heart sank. The spirit wasn't done with her yet. For the next few days, Claire felt an eerie sense of calm. The spirit seemed to have retreated, leaving her in relative peace. Her parents, though still on edge, were relieved to see her smiling again. But deep down, Claire knew it wasn't over. The spirit wasn't gone. It was waiting, watching, and gathering strength. Father Lewis stayed in contact, preparing Claire for the final confrontation at the lagoon. He instructed her to maintain her faith and keep the medallion and crucifix close. Despite his reassurances, Claire couldn't shake the dread that something terrible was about to happen. On the third night after the exorcism, Claire dreamt of the lagoon again. The dream was vivid and terrifying. In it, she stood by the water's edge, her reflection rippling on the surface. A cold wind blew through the trees, carrying whispers that grew louder with each passing moment. Join me beneath the water." Suddenly, the surface of the lagoon broke and the spirit emerged. Its rotting hands reached for her, its hollow eyes burning with malevolence. Claire tried to run, but her feet were rooted to the ground. The spirit dragged her into the water, its icy grip pulling her under. She struggled to breathe as the murky depths closed around her. She woke up gasping, her heart racing. Her room was dark, but she could feel a presence. Claire turned on her bedside lamp, but the small glow of light did little to ease her terror. As she looked down at her hands, she froze. There, on her left wrist, was a handprint, dark and bruised, as though someone had gripped her with immense force. She let out a soft whimper, clutching the medallion around her neck. "Not again," she whispered. The attacks grew worse with each passing day. Claire couldn't sleep, eat, or think clearly. Invisible hands yanked at her hair, slammed doors, and threw objects across the room. The atmosphere in the house became oppressive, with the air thick and suffocating. Her parents tried to comfort her, but they were terrified. One evening, Claire's mother found her sitting on the floor of her room, rocking back and forth. "I can't take this anymore," Claire sobbed. "It won't stop. It won't leave me alone." Her mother knelt beside her, pulling her into a hug. "We'll fix this, sweetheart. We'll end it. I promise." That night, the spirit played its cruelest trick yet. As Claire lay in bed, clutching the crucifix, she heard a voice, her father's voice, calling to her from the hallway. "Claire, come here, sweetheart." Confused, she sat up. "Dad?" the voice repeated, softer this time. "Come here, Claire. It's okay." She hesitated, but eventually got up and opened her bedroom door. The hallway was empty, shrouded in darkness. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped her wrist, yanking her forward. She screamed, trying to pull away, but the grip tightened. "You can't escape me," the spirit hissed, its face materializing inches from hers. Its hollow eyes bored into her, and its jagged teeth gleamed in the dim light. Claire collapsed to the floor, sobbing. The spirit released her with a laugh, its form dissolving into the shadows. The next morning, Claire sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. Her father tried to comfort her, but she shook her head. "I can't do this anymore, Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It won't stop until it gets what it wants." "What does it want?" her father asked, his voice shaking. Claire looked up, her eyes hollow. "It wants me. It wants to drag me to the lagoon." Her father clenched his fists. "That's not going to happen. We'll end this, Claire." "I promise." Father Lewis visited later that day, his expression grim. "The spirit is becoming more aggressive. It knows we're planning to sever its connection to you. That's why it's lashing out." Claire bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. "I don't think I can fight it anymore," she admitted. "You can," Father Lewis said firmly. "You have to. If you give in, it will claim your soul. The lagoon will become your prison forever." Claire shuddered at the thought. "Tomorrow," Father Lewis continued, "we'll go to the lagoon. That's where its power is strongest, but it's also where we can bind it and send it back to where it came from." That night, the spirit made one final attempt to break Claire's resolve. She was lying in bed, the medallion clutched tightly in her hand, when the room suddenly went ice cold. The whisper started softly but quickly grew into a deafening roar. "Claire, you cannot escape me!" The shadowy figure materialized at the foot of her bed, its grotesque form larger and more menacing than ever. It lunged at her, pinning her down. Claire screamed, struggling against its icy grip. Her parents burst into the room, only to be thrown back by an invisible force. The spirit leaned in close, its breath rancid and cold. "Give in, Claire," it hissed. "You're already mine." "No," Claire cried, her voice filled with defiance. She reached for the crucifix on her nightstand, pressing it against the spirit's chest. The spirit howled in pain, its form dissolving into smoke. The room fell silent, but Claire knew it wasn't over. The next morning, Claire woke up bruised and exhausted, but determined. She looked at her parents and Father Lewis, her jaw set with resolve. "Let's finish this," she said. With holy water, prayers, and unwavering determination, they prepared for the final confrontation at the lagoon. The next day dawned grey and ominous, as if the sky itself knew what awaited. Claire, flanked by her parents, Father Lewis and Father Mark, approached the lagoon with a heavy heart. Father Lewis carried a leather-bound Bible, a flask of holy water, and a blessed silver dagger, tools he hoped would sever the spirit's connection to Claire. Father Mark followed, carrying a censer that emitted steady tendrils of fragrant smoke. "Stay close and do exactly as we say," Father Lewis instructed. Claire nodded, clutching the medallion around her neck. Her heart pounded as the lagoon came into view. It looked even more sinister than she remembered, the surface unnaturally still, the water reflecting the dull sky like a tarnished mirror. As the group stepped closer, the air grew colder. A foul smell hung in the air, the scent of decay and stagnant water. Claire's chest tightened. She felt the entity's presence before it even appeared. "It's here," she whispered. Father Lewis took his place at the edge of the lagoon, raising the Bible. "We're here to end this," he declared, his voice echoing across the still water. The lagoon responded immediately. The surface rippled violently, and the wind whipped through the trees. From the center of the water, the spirit began to emerge. It was larger and more grotesque than ever, its waterlogged skin sagging, its hollow eyes burning with hatred. "She is mine," it bellowed, its voice shaking the ground. Father Lewis began reciting the exorcism prayer, his voice steady despite the spirit's chilling presence. He sprinkled holy water onto the ground, creating a circle of protection around Claire and her family. The spirit writhed and howled, its form twisting in and out of the shadows. It lashed out, sending waves of water crashing onto the shore. "You cannot banish me," it roared. "She called me. She belongs to me." "Your time is over," Father Mark shouted, swinging the censer in wide arcs. The smoke filled the air, and the spirit recoiled, its shrieks growing louder. Claire's medallion burned hot against her chest, and she clutched it tightly. Suddenly, the spirit lunged at Claire, its long skeletal arms stretched toward her, its claw-like fingers ready to drag her into the water. Father Lewis acted quickly, hurling a splash of holy water at the entity. The spirit screamed in agony, but it didn't retreat. "Claire!" Father Lewis shouted. "Speak to it! Renounce its hold on you!" Claire's voice trembled, but she stood her ground. "You don't own me!" she shouted, her voice breaking with emotion. "I reject you! You have no power over me!" The spirit faltered, its form flickering. "No!" it hissed. "You are mine! You invited me! You cannot escape!" Father Lewis stepped forward, the silver dagger glinting in his hand. He began chanting in Latin, his voice rising with each word. The spirit thrashed wildly, sending tendrils of black mist toward the group. Claire's parents held onto her tightly, shielding her as Father Lewis plunged the dagger into the ground at the edge of the lagoon. The earth shook, and the water churned violently. The spirit let out a deafening wail as its form began to dissolve into the mist. "You will never take another soul," Father Lewis declared. "Return to the depths where you belong." The spirit's form crumbled, its screams fading into the wind. The lagoon grew still once more, the oppressive air lifting. Father Mark completed the ritual by sprinkling holy water into the lagoon, sealing the entity's fate. He turned to Claire, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's over. You're free." Claire collapsed into her father's arms, tears streaming down her face. "It's really gone?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Father Lewis nodded. "It's over." But there was one final step to ensure the spirit could never return. Father Lewis instructed Claire to tie a small red thread, blessed during the ritual, around her wrist. "Keep this on for the next 15 days, he said. "It will protect you from any lingering connection." As the group left the lagoon, Claire felt lighter, as though a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. But the spirit wasn't ready to let them go without a fight. As they walked away, the wind picked up, carrying familiar voices. "Claire, Claire, don't leave me." The voice mimicked her mother, her father, even Father Lewis. Claire's steps faltered, but she remembered Father Lewis's warning. "Whatever you do, do not look back." She gripped her medallion tightly, focusing on the path ahead. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, but she didn't turn. By the time they reached the car, the voices had faded, and the oppressive feeling was gone. Back home, Claire felt a cautious sense of relief. Over the next 15 days, she followed Father Lewis's instructions, never removing the red thread. On the 15th day, she stood by a flowing river, letting the thread slip from her wrist and into the water. As the current carried it away, Claire whispered a prayer of gratitude. Weeks turned into months, and Claire gradually returned to a normal life. The bruises faded, the nightmares stopped, and the cold presence no longer lingered. Father Lewis kept in touch, assuring her that the spirit had been banished for good. But Claire was forever changed by the experience. She avoided lakes, lagoons, and any water bodies that felt even remotely unnatural. And though she moved forward, a part of her would always carry the memory of the drowned spirit, a reminder of how close she came to losing herself to the darkness. The events surrounding the lagoon and the drowned spirit left scars on Claire's body and soul, but they also brought clarity and resilience. Months after the final ritual, Claire had fully moved back into her college dorm, determined to regain the normalcy that had been stolen from her. Rachel welcomed her back with open arms, though her concern was still evident. "You're really okay now?" Rachel asked one night as they sat in their favorite corner cafe, their textbooks spread out but forgotten. Claire smiled faintly, the kind of smile that spoke of strength earned the hard way. "Yeah, I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I've got my life back." The physical toll of the ordeal had been immense. The illnesses, injuries, and weeks of sleepless nights had left Claire weaker than she'd ever been. Recovery had been slow and painstaking. Regular doctor visits and therapy became part of her routine, not just to heal her body, but also to process the trauma. Therapists initially struggled to grasp Claire's experience, but one, a kind older woman named Dr. Harper, helped her put it into perspective. Whether it was supernatural or psychological, Dr. Harper had said, "You overcame it, Claire. You endured when most people would have broken. That's what matters." For Claire, it wasn't just about enduring. It was about reclaiming control over her life. Her family, once close but distant in the way families often grow as children get older, had become her greatest support system. After everything they'd been through together, Claire's bond with her parents and brother was unshakable. On weekends, she drove back to Denver to spend time with them, helping her mother cook or sitting with her father on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. "That spirit almost tore us apart," her father said one evening, his voice heavy with emotion. "But we're stronger now. It doesn't stand a chance against us." Claire reached over, squeezing his hand. "It doesn't, not anymore." The lagoon, however, remained a part of her story. Though the spirit was banished, Claire couldn't entirely escape its shadow. She'd stopped by Father Lewis's church once more, months after the incident, to thank him. The older priest had greeted her warmly, but he offered a gentle reminder. "The world is full of mysteries, Claire. There are things out there, forces, both good and evil. You were fortunate this time, but always remember, curiosity has its price." She heeded his words. Claire avoided large bodies of water entirely. Rivers, lakes, and lagoons no longer carried the peaceful allure they once had. Despite the lingering memories, Claire found strength in the lessons she'd learned. She became an advocate for mental health, sharing her story in pieces, not the supernatural parts, but the toll trauma had taken on her. Her honesty struck a chord with those who heard her speak. Friends and classmates began opening up about their struggles, finding comfort in Claire's resilience. "Life is fragile," she told one friend during a late-night dorm conversation. "But we're tougher than we think. Sometimes we just need a reminder of how much we can handle." Years later, Claire visited the lagoon one last time. She hadn't planned to, it was purely coincidental. A road trip with friends had brought them close to Lake Hollow, and though the memories sent chills down her spine, she felt compelled to stop. She stood at the water's edge, the medallion Father Lewis had given her still tucked beneath her shirt. The lagoon was eerily still, just as it had been that first day. A cold breeze rippled the water, carrying with it faint whispers she could barely make out. "Claire?" The voice sent a shiver down her spine, but she didn't flinch. She gripped the medallion and whispered, "You have no power over me anymore." The lagoon was silent. Claire turned and walked away, never looking back. The haunting became a distant memory, a reminder of the strength she'd gained and the importance of respecting the unknown. Life moved on, as it always does. And though Claire lived with caution, she refused to let fear define her. She graduated, traveled, and built a life filled with light and love. The darkness of the lagoon remained a part of her story, but it no longer held her captive. It had tried to claim her soul, but in the end, Claire emerged stronger than ever.